Next up, please give a warm welcome to Jud Olanoff, founding partner, K Ventures, for a conversation with Tom Kalil, CEO, Renaissance Philanthropy.
So it's my pleasure to welcome Tom Kalil. His career is so fascinating, I have to do a short intro here. Tom is the founder and CEO of Renaissance Philanthropy. He served in the White House in both the Clinton and Obama administrations. As Deputy Director in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, he designed and launched dozens of White House science and tech initiatives. Tom also served as the Chief Innovation Officer at Schmidt Futures, and he's on the board of Future House, a nonprofit that builds AI-powered assistants for the laboratory. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
So before we get to your current role at Renaissance, I want to actually go back. You've had this series of roles in your career at the White House, at Schmidt, and now at Renaissance, where really you're imagining the tech that's coming in the future. I wonder, how did you end up doing that, and what inspired you to dedicate your career to that?
Yeah, so there wasn't a long-term plan. My parents were both neuroscientists, and the human brain is the most complicated three-dimensional object you can imagine. 87 billion neurons, 100 trillion synapses. I think that conversation around the dinner table had something to do with it. In 87, 88, I worked on the issues department of the Dukakis for President campaign. And every time he went to a different state, I had to learn about what was happening to industry in that state. And this common thread was that whether it was steel or machine tools or autos or even high-tech sectors like semiconductors and semiconductor manufacturing equipment, the US was losing market share. So that really motivated me to say, what sort of investments does the United States need to make in science and technology? And then I got to staff Gordon Moore, the guy who came up with Moore's Law in 1965. And then I was privileged to be able to work for President Clinton. And one of the perks of working at the White House is you get to send the President of the United States a decision memo and have him check the box that says yes. So people would give me ideas. I would vet those ideas. If I thought it was worth bringing to the attention of the President, I would send him a decision memo. If he liked it, he would talk about it in the State of the Union. Within a short period of time, there might be a hotel full of people working on it. And if that happens enough times, you begin to develop a far more expansive view of what is at least potentially changeable, because it's the result of human action or inaction. So there's something that we're not doing that we should be doing, or there's something that we're currently doing that we should stop doing. So those are the two questions that I'm interested in.
What is the decision memo that you sent to either President Clinton or President Obama where you got the yes and you're proudest of it?
Well, the thing that I'm proudest of is that when I worked for President Obama, in addition to being an individual contributor, I was able to recruit 20 policy entrepreneurs to the White House, and they're all doing amazing things. So that's the thing that I'm most proud of.
Okay, so let's fast forward now to present day. So you're the CEO and founder of Renaissance Philanthropy. Can you tell us what it is and what's really unique about it and what you're trying to accomplish?
So our vision is that in the same way that wealthy Italian families supported the Italian Renaissance, that today's philanthropists could be supporting a 21st century Renaissance that is fueled at least in part by advances in science, technology, and innovation. In the US alone, we have 2,000 families with $500 million or more of wealth, and their current level of philanthropy as a percentage of their wealth is 1.2%. So if you assume that they're doing as well as an index fund, there's room for them to be doing a lot more. And we want to help philanthropists and foundations identify really ambitious goals where philanthropy and foundations can play an important role in helping them happen, leveraging science, technology, and innovation.
Okay, so within that overall mission, let's move to healthcare and AI. just very broadly, I mean, we've heard a lot today, but the big picture, what do you think are just the biggest opportunities for AI in healthcare, both short-term and long-term?
Well, one that I'm particularly excited about is that, we've talked a lot about the fact that the US devotes 20% of our GDP and has worse outcomes than our other developed country peers. So anything that could help allow us to improve health outcomes and lower costs, I think would be at the top of my list. And particularly if you're looking at the under 65 premature morbidity and mortality, a lot of that is driven by things like diet, exercise, smoking, drugs, and alcohol abuse. So the ability to combine AI and the social and behavioral sciences, I think is a really promising area.
We have a lot of policymakers here. We obviously have health tech founders. I'm curious, how do you think those two groups can collaborate better to tackle these problems?
So one of the things that policymakers need to do is to ask investors what is in their anti-portfolio. In other words, what is it that they're not doing that they would like to be doing? So for example, even though antimicrobial resistance is a huge and growing problem, if you talk to VCs, they're not investing in that. They're not investing in new antibiotics. So the right response to that from policymakers is not like, well, I guess we don't get new antibiotics and we're eventually going to live in a post-penicillin world. It's to understand why they don't invest and what we would need to do differently, like some change in the way that we reimburse for antibiotics. Similarly, a lot of VCs that I talk to, when I say, are you investing in prevention? They say, yes, as long as the intervention has a payback period of less than 18 months. That is crazy. That implies some totally insane discount rate. And so understanding why that is and what it would take to change that, I think is one very important conversation. So not just, which of your portfolio companies are you most excited about? That's a worthwhile conversation. But what do you know deeply that you know is important that you're not able to invest in? And what is it that is, preventing you from doing that? One of my favorite articles about management science is, the title is The Folly of Rewarding A While Expecting B.
You've also made the point that we don't necessarily have the right incentives for companies to build the big data sets that we really need as a society to tackle these problems. Can you just explain the problem with the incentive structure and how we could change it?
Yes. So first of all, when you hear AI, you should be thinking math. So if you look under the hood, how many people took linear algebra and multivariable calculus in the audience? All right. So if you look at most of the time what it is that AI is actually doing, it is serving as what mathematicians call a universal function approximator. So you give it inputs and outputs, and you say, learn the function that maps between the input and the output. So if you look at the areas where we've made real progress in machine learning, ImageNet for image recognition, Common Crawl for large language models, ERA 5 for weather forecasting, the Protein Data Bank for protein structure prediction and protein design. Several things are true. We have a well-defined problem that is leveraging the ability of machine learning to map between an input and an output. We have a large, high-quality, diverse data set. We have a eval, and we have a leaderboard. So those four things are called the Common Task Framework. The problem is that if I came to you and I said, I would like to you to give me $50 million, and I'm going to use that to create a high-quality data set and then put it in the public domain, that would be a very short meeting, because you would appropriately ask, how am I going to get my money back? So I think the question is, when we think about these data sets, are they private goods? that is something that a private investor is willing to pay for? Are they what are called club goods? So these are things that are non-rival but excludable. So for example, 14 pharma companies have formed a consortium. They went to the UK Biobank and they said, we are willing to pay to have 300,000 participants in the UK Biobank use the O-Link assay that allows us to measure 5,400 proteins from a drop of blood. And we get 9 months of exclusive access to that. Or is it a public good, that is a data set that we're going to make publicly available? So the reason that this is so important is that these applications of AI and machine learning, in many instances, don't work if you don't have the data. And that's something that I wish more policymakers understood.
So could you maybe give us a real world example or two of just like big challenges, ideally in healthcare,
Sure.
that would be where we could really use this common task approach?
Yeah, so imagine that you are a cardiologist in 2022 and you see a patient complaining of some sort of heart problem. You don't know what is ultimately going to happen to that patient. But in 2025, we do know. We know whether or not that patient had a sudden cardiac arrest or not, for example. And so machine learning researchers are convinced that there is additional information that we could wring out of the electrocardiogram because we know what ultimately happens to that patient. So any area when you have patient information, you have medical images and other high-dimensional data, you have blood samples, there's just a huge amount more that we can learn from that information.
I've heard you say that in this new world of AI, that the payoff associated with setting the agenda has increased. There's a premium on it. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so by agenda setting, I mean the ability to articulate where are we today as of the summer of 2025, where would we like to be over the short, medium, and long term, and how are we going to get there? And one of the reasons that the payoff associated with doing that has increased is the thing that I mentioned at the beginning. That is, we have 2,000 families with $500 million or more in wealth. And they're able to engage in philanthropy, investing, but with a longer time horizon, advocacy for policy change, and building coalitions for those problems that can't be solved by a single individual or organization. So as opposed to saying, well, I have this idea, but if like NIH doesn't fund it, it's not going to happen. There's now just a greater number of individuals and organizations that are in a position to at least make mid-scale bets on important ideas. So there are some things like the James Webb Space Telescope, which cost $12 billion, and the Large Hadron Collider, which cost over $20 billion, that are still going to remain the province of nation states. But I think that there's a lot of areas in healthcare where these families and philanthropists can make really important investments. And so I think what this requires is, for example, not just saying, oh, data is important, but to be able to identify a particular data set that would have a transformational impact on healthcare and on accelerating the development of diagnostics, therapies, and vaccines, and then to say, does that data exist? So it's a matter of us figuring out how to share that data using privacy-preserving approaches to machine learning, like federated learning and secure multi-party computation, or is that data set so important that we should be creating it de novo?
So let's say that Renaissance is successful in getting some of those data sets built. We have a lot of founders here who are building tech startups to do specific kinds of care delivery,
Sure.
for example, or diagnostics.
Yes.
What is your advice to them, broadly speaking, on what would you be building? What should they be building?
Yeah. I think we are still underinvesting in vaccines, not only in the United States, but around the world. So there's one entrepreneur that we're working with who is using AI, recent advances in mRNA vaccines, and nanolipid technology to develop vaccines that, if successful, would save 1 million lives a year. So that's an area that I'm incredibly excited about.
You mentioned it before, but you've talked a lot about biobanks and biomarkers. Can we just go back to that? You've said that they're underrated. Explain that and how it applies to AI for health.
So Heidi Williams, who is an economist who studies innovation, used to be at Stanford and is now at Dartmouth. She wrote a paper with her collaborators on what is the social net present value of biomarkers just for cancer, when those biomarkers are solid enough so that the FDA is willing to use them as a surrogate endpoint. And her conclusion is that it's $2 trillion. You might say, how did she get a large number like that? Well, if you have a surrogate endpoint, the clinical trial is shorter, the net present value from the point of view of any individual firm is higher, they invest more, and survival time increases at a faster rate. Unfortunately, I found out about this paper when I left the White House, and if I'd known about it when I was still at the White House, I would have been calling the then NIH director, Francis Collins, saying, why aren't we doing more in the discovery and validation of biomarkers? And this is an area where the private sector underinvests because they don't get to capture all the value of the discovery and validation of these biomarkers.
Let's say you're back at Lion Forum 10 years from now and we're having the same conversation. I'm curious, at that point, take us into the future. What will AI have accomplished in healthcare, and what will be the big challenges and outstanding items that we'll still be wrestling with and talking about?
Yeah, so I would like to see a world in which we're doing a lot more on prevention, but we have to figure out how do we make prevention pay. So someone told me the following story, which is that the head of a major hospital system, before he left for the weekend, he would call and ask for one number, and if that number was high, he left in a good mood, and that number was the ICU utilization rate. So I would like to imagine a world in which the private sector and the research community are incentivized to use AI and the social and behavioral sciences as a way of dramatically improving our ability on the prevention side. I also think there's huge opportunities in drug discovery. And in addition to my role as CEO of Convergent Research, one of the projects we're funding is called Eve Bio, which stands for Everything Versus Everything. It's mapping the interaction between every drug and every off-target effect and releasing that as a public data set. So that'll be useful for predicting negative side effects, for identifying opportunities for drug repurposing, and also for enabling combination therapies as well. So if we were having this conversation, I would have liked to see us get our collective act together to say, what are the data sets like that that could have a transformational impact on dramatically lowering the time and cost associated with developing new therapies and new vaccines.
Before we go to audience questions, I have to ask, now with AI, we're really on the cusp of a new kind of industrial revolution. You were in the White House, if I'm not mistaken, at basically the dawn of the internet. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about what that was like, and
yes.
From inside the White House?
So there was like a particular moment when I knew this was going to be big. So I was one of two people in the White House who also hung out with a federal agency called DARPA. And in the early 90s, I remember this as clear as day, they were like, hey, Kalil, we have something to show you. And they showed me two undergraduates at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, Eric Bina and Mark Andreessen, had just released Mosaic. And so they showed me what it looked like when you were running it over an OC48 network. Now today, everyone has high-speed networks, but in 1993, this was like being in a time machine. And so I could immediately see that innovation could occur at the edge. Two undergraduates could come up with something, and unlike the phone network, when we only got call waiting when AT&T thought it was time for us to get call waiting, innovation could occur at the edge as opposed to the center of the network. Everyone was going to be able to have their own newspaper, radio station, and TV station, and this was going to enable many-to-many interaction as opposed to just one-to-many interaction. And I also had the opportunity to show this to my boss, Bob Rubin, who had previously been the chair of Goldman Sachs. And he said, Tom, who owns this? And I said, Bob, nobody owns this. And that really blew his mind.
I want to follow up and ask about your next conversation with President Clinton, reporting back on that, but we don't have time. We'll do that later. Let's do audience questions.
I'm also open to high-quality free advice as well.
In the realm of preventative medicine, could you comment on AI in gene editing, please?
Yes. So I think there are a ton of opportunities in gene editing, but I think we have to figure out how to lower the cost associated with doing that. Because if every CRISPR-based therapy is going to cost millions of dollars, then it's going to be very difficult to scale it up. So I think that's job one in that area.
Other questions?
I really liked your point on the insurance pools and how can we invest in real prevention and monetize the savings that we know are out there from that early intervention. What progress have you made in talking to broader insurance and applying that in health insurance?
So one thing that is going on that I think is worth keeping an eye on is that someone who used to be at CMS and got a job working at ARPA-H as a program manager has launched a program called Heroes. And he is piloting a pay-for-success effort. So the idea is that you have some organization or consortia that takes responsibility for a particular health outcome in a geography. You know what the baseline is, and ARPA-H has a rate card. So they say, if you approve this health outcome by this amount, then you will get paid. So those are the types of experiments that we're beginning to see. But I think if we find ones that work, we have to figure out how to scale them up.
I think we have time for one more.
You talk a lot about data sets, which is awesome, and yes, AI is all predictive mathematics. One of the last kind of big ones that again came out of the U.S. and the DOE was the Human Genome Project.
Yes.
It sounds like is that going to have to be a government-sponsored or an internationally sponsored thing? Can we rely kind of on that, or is there a golden goose out there? How do we make it not one person's golden goose? How do we?
Yeah. So I think the question is, if it's a private good, then there's no incentive for any of the companies to release the data. So I think that's the challenge. I think there might be some areas where it's more efficient for it to be a public good. The good news is that the most important part, arguably, one of the most important parts of the Human Genome Project was an NHGRI program called the $1,000 genome. So we went from the first genome costing $100 million to now rapidly approaching $100. So researchers are developing all of these technologies, screen pooling, droplet-based microfluidics, multiplexing, all of these approaches that are reducing by orders of magnitude the time and cost associated with generating the data. So that's something I'm very excited about as well. So not only do we need to say, what are the problems that we need to solve, number one. Number two, what data set and benchmark, when combined with machine learning, would allow us to solve that problem? And if that data set doesn't exist, and if it would be prohibitively expensive to create, is there a platform technology that will lower the cost of that by multiple orders of magnitude? That's what I mean by agenda setting.
Please join me in thanking Tom Kalil.
Thank you.